Shvato, everybody. This week we're Zocha. We start the Chumash all over again, and almost every shir on Bereshit starts with the first Rashi. So let this be no exception. Famous Rashi. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Lo hayat tzorich lahaskil haTorah, ela me'achodesh hazelachem. The Torah should have started in the beginning of Shmos with the mitzvah of HaChodesh HaZelachem, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. Shehi mitzvah rishona shenitztava by Yisrael. This was the first mitzvah that the Jewish people, as a people, were commanded. Uma ta'am pasach b'Bereshit. What's the reason why Torah begins with Bereshit? Now, the question seems to be, there's a lot that would be missing if the Torah wouldn't be in Bereshit, but the Rav Yitzchak used to look at this as the Torah is basically a book of laws. We know that, for example, if you wanted to study, have a chavrus in halacha, so you pick up a Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't contain really any hashkafa for the most part. You wanted to do something on hashkafa, you wouldn't find the halacha section. There are books on halacha, there's books on hashkafa. So Rav Yitzchak isn't suggesting that what's written about the Avos and was written about Yetzias Mitzrayim should not be contained in any work, but it shouldn't be contained in the Torah. But if that's the case, however, obviously the Torah felt compelled that both the Hashkafa and Halacha should be in the same book. So what do I want to accomplish? Let's look at from the Hashkafa perspective. Let's forget about whether we accomplish our goals in the Halacha section of the Torah. But what should be my goals if I were God and I wanted to write a book to humanity? What would I want to accomplish? So first, I want to introduce myself. All right, hello, I'm God. Well, and who are you? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about the fact that that you're all knowing, that you're all powerful, that you're all good. All the you don't make mistakes, and that in fact, if you want to know, some of the basic questions that a human being should ask himself is, how did the universe get here? The world that I exist, who created it? Is there a creator? Is there only one creator? And if he did create it, why did he create the world? Are there any expectations on those of us we created? These are that should be what information is conveyed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to us, a proper introduction of who he is and what he did for us in the past, and why, therefore, he's entitled to have certain expectations. And the question is, does HaKadosh Baruch Hu accomplish all that in the opening Parsha of the Torah, in this week's Parsha, Parshas Bereshit? And what it looks like at first glance, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu pretty much fails on all of the above. For example, I'm just going to quote you a couple of psukim or references within the beginning of this week's parsha that are problematic. In Perek Aleph, Pasuk Chavav, Vayomer Elohim, Nasa Adam Mitzalmenu Kidmusenu, V'yidgu b'dgat hayam uvov ha'shamayim uvahema b'chol ha'aretz b'chol ha'remes ha'remes al ha'aretz. Beginning of the pasuk, and God said, "Let us make man in our image." Who's God talking to? This is before the creation of man. Again, if I want to convey the idea that there is only one God and one creator, then why would I say, quote a pasuk that seems to say that God is having a conversation with some other being, probably a divine being, the human beings weren't created yet, asking for their approval. Is it a good idea? Should we make man or not? I thought God was Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Why make that? At the end of Bereshit, which is something, by the way, that we're not going to talk about tonight. I'm just going to raise it because it's a question that should come up in this context, even though it would be a separate shir on its own. At the end of Parshat Bereshit, after a whole story of the sin of Adam and Chava with the Eitz Hadas and Cain killing Hevel, and a description of all the other the generations that followed Cain and Hevel, and what they accomplished or did not accomplish spiritually in the world, how man seemed to deteriorate spiritually from level to level. God comes up with the following evaluation. Right? It says that Vayinochem Hashem ki asa et Adam ba'aretz. God, well, let's see how would we translate? God sort of regretted having made man on earth, and there's a whole thing where the word Vayinochem means regretted or took consolation. Maybe he was happy. They're different, but Lamaisa, the simple pshat means he seems that he regretted. Vayitzaseh v'libo, and he had sadness in his heart. It seems to make a statement that looking back at the end of Sefer Bereshit, God was upset that he created man. Now, obviously, that cannot be the pshat, the pasuk, but simple pshat. If you look at the simple reading of Parshat Bereshit, you would come to the same conclusion. I blew it. I always talk to my wife whenever our kids would get in trouble, and we would lament over it. And I'd say, look at, our percentages are better than God's. If you look at, God's the father of all of us, how many of his children really live up to expectations? Gave a little bit of comfort at the moment. Anyway, but when you look even closer, these are two obvious psukim that seem to cry out, is God really one? Are there other gods? And does God make mistakes? Because he created man, but now he's looking back and said, maybe it wasn't a great idea. But if you even look closer, there are a number of major questions within the text that seem to reinforce this idea that God's not all powerful or all knowing. Example number one. You don't have to go very far. First pasuk in the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim. Okay? Rashi. Right? What does Rashi say? Bara Elokim. And we'll see. Rashi says, V'lo amar bara Hashem. Now, if you look into it, in the first parak of Bereshit, God uses one alias, the name Elokim. Only when we get to Parak Beis do we find out that God has another name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So why? What's usually people with several aliases have something to hide. Either they're criminals or they're spies. Why does God have several names? So Rashi points out, well, God in Parak Aleph it only mentions creation regarding Elokim, Midas Hadin. Why? Right? Originally, God intended to create the world and run it through the venue of Midas Hadin, of the attribute of justice. He saw that the world would not continue to exist if he continued to run the world just with justice. So when we get to Parak Beis, so we find God acting with human beings also b'midas rachamim. In fact, God is called Hashem Elokim. The word Yud Kei Vav Kei, the midas rachamim, is even come first before midas hadin. Okay, that's true. There is, the Torah is, God has different names. In Parak Aleph, only midas hadin is used. That's all true. But what is the implication of that? That God thought only to midas hadin and realized my idea wasn't such a great idea. The world will never continue to exist if I continue doing it this way. I have to change and add in midas rachmi, and maybe even make midas rachmi my primary way of connecting with the world. But you didn't know something you didn't know. You thought one way, God, and then you see through trial and error that it didn't work, and you change your mind. But you're perfect. You don't make mistakes, and you should know what's going to be in the future, right? Another question, just a few psukim later, Parak Aleph Pasuk Dalet. Vayar Elokim et ha'or ki tov. God saw the light that was good. Vayabdel Elokim bein ha'or u'bein ha'choshech. God made a separation between day and night. Now this pasuk on its own should not be that problematic, but Rashi creates the following difficulty. Vayar Elokim et ha'or ki tov vayabdel. Af bazu an tzrichim l'divrei agada. Right, just like Rashi used agada in a previous pasuk, this pasuk also needs the midrashic interpretation. Ra'ol she'enu kedai v'shtamesh b'rishayim. What is pshat here? What does he say? How it should explain? God saw that the light was too good for the Rishayim in the world, for the evil people in the world. Vivdilo l'tzadikim la'asid lava. And he separated it. Meaning, what do you mean he separated? He removed it from the world, put it in storage for tzadikim la'asid lava. Only the tzadikim should be zochet to this unbelievable light. That's the medrash. Now, then Rashi quotes the simple pshat. Pshuto, lefi pshuto, kach parshehu, re'eu kitov, ve'na lo l'choshech shiu mishtamshim berbuvya, v'kavel l'zut chumo, v'yom u'lezet chumo b'layla. Simple pshat was, what do you mean? He thought it was good. He thought the light was good, but he also needed darkness for whatever reason. Right? Why do we have light and darkness? Again, not now. And he separated. Light would function during the day and darkness would function at night. That's a simple pshat. But normally when Rashi gives a pshat and a drash, Rashi's the passion. He always quotes the pshat first. Here Rashi says, no, you're forced. His drash comes before the pshat. It's not just simply separated between day and night. It seems to indicate that God separated it simply because it's good. If it was a question of function, it didn't matter whether the light was good or bad. He still would make a separation between light and darkness. Because it was good, he separated it. And according to the Chazal, what does that mean? Too good for the people in this world now, for the Rishayim. Well, didn't you know that in advance? What were you thinking when you created this unique light? I don't know. Made a mistake. Second mistake that God made. Okay. Next, Perek Aleph Pasuk Tezayin. Very, 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 very strange pasuk. And again, there's a problem within the text. You don't even have to, before you even get to the Meforshim. Listen carefully to the wording of the pasuk. God made the two large luminaries. Two large luminaries. We're assuming they're the same size. Then he says, Et ha'ma'or hagadol l'memshelat hayom, the big luminary to rule during the day, Vet ha'ma'or hakatan l'memshelat halayla, and the little luminary to rule at night, Ve'et ha'kochavim, and the stars. Wait a minute. First you told me there were two equally large luminaries. They were both large. Now you tell me there's one large and one small, and the larger one rules during the day, the smaller one at night, but there's also kochavim. The end of the pasuk contradicts the beginning of the pasuk. What was it? Two. So again, Rashi doesn't tell me the whole story. Rashi fills me in here a little bit as well. Rashi says, Shavim nivra'u. They were created equal. Yes, right? The beginning of the pasuk is correct. God originally created the moon to be the exact same size as the sun. V'nismat halavana, and God subsequently diminished the size of the moon. Shekitraga v'amra, because it complained to God and it said, Efshul l'shnei malachim she'yishamshu b'keter echad. Right, God, the moon comes to says, I think you're making a mistake. You can't have two powers share of two bodies of equal power sharing control. Usually doesn't work that way. Yeshivas usually, the only yeshiva that they ever know that ever worked with two Rosh yeshivas of equal status was in the Gush. You talked about Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Amital Zichrono and Levracha. But in most cases, you can't have two people running the place with the same authority. Rarely is that going to work. And that's what the moon said to God. It's not working. God thinks about it and he says, you're right, made a mistake. So how are we going to solve the problem? So God says to the moon, diminish yourself. which says, I come with the problem. I'm the one who raised it. I'm telling you, and you agree with me, and I'm the one who should suffer, right? Rashi continues, God says, okay, I understand why you're a little bit ticked off. And so there, what I'm going to do is I'll compensate you by giving you thousands and thousands of stars that will be there as well. So if you add up the stars with the moon, right, you're certainly as large as the sun was. And in fact, what Rashi does not say, again, Rashi says that because of this, on Rosh Chodesh, God says to Bnei Israel, bring me a korban chatas on Rosh Chodesh to make up for the sin of the fact of what I did to the moon. So why did he have to do that to the moon? And again, but the question that is relevant to us is, what was God thinking originally when he made the sun and the moon the exact same size, if that's what happened? And two, again, forget the problem of a talking moon. That's a different problem. The moon is not a live thing. How can it talk? Did this really happen? Obviously, you have to assume that there is some message here. But again, Psukim seem to indicate that there were they were both originally of equal size, and one became smaller for some reason or another. Did God make a mistake? It seems that he did. Another mistake. One more, right? Two more mistakes we're going to deal with, even though this one, I don't really have a great answer, right? We'll get to it. This is in Perek Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Yeah. Vayivra Elokim et hataninim hagdolim. God created the big taninim. What are these taninim? So again, Rashi says, Dagim gdolim shabayam. Okay, big fish in the sea. Ubedivrei Agada. Again, here he quotes Agada. Here the Agada is not the first pshat. Hulav Yasanu ben Zuga. Shabaram Zachar Nekeva. It's the legendary Leviathan and its mate. They created the male and female. V'harages hanekeva. U'molcha l'tzadikim l'asulav. And God killed off the female and salted her, preserved her. Today we put her in the freezer. For tzadikim l'asulav. Right, so that there's the famous Sudas Leviathan that we'll have when the time of Mashiach. Sh'im yifru v'yirbu, because if these Leviathans would mate, loiskayim ha'olam b'fneihem, the world could not endure. Now, Rashi doesn't quote the entire Chazal. There is one point that Rashi leaves out in the fact that in the original Chazal, God says God castrated the male and then killed the female. Question, of course, comes, once you castrate the male, there should be no need to have to kill the female. And why kill the female, not the male? Right? Why, And Rashi is bothered by one more problem. It says, again, not every text has this in Rashi. Taninim ksiv, right? It's the word taninim is written without a yud. It's chaser. Maybe that indicates him that there was only one. But here again, it's interesting. God doesn't mention any animal by name. It mentions species, birds, fish, behemoth. Never mentions a cow, a horse, a goldfish. The only species that's mentioned by name are these taninim, which is misspelled. And God originally created two, but saw that if they would have children, they would destroy the world. So he had to kill one of them. And saved Lios level. Why? But again, simple pshat, you made a mistake. You thought one way, you realized major mistake. I can't allow this to continue. I'm going to have to either murder a fish, right? Okay, but I guess that's legal. A castration is another problem, of course, because halachically we're not supposed to castrate. But I guess maybe in this case, to save the world, that would be maybe permitted. What's going on? Last but not least, probably the most famous of all the problems, Perek Aleph Pasuk Chav Zayin. It says, let's start let's work the opposite way. Let's start from Perek Beis Pasuk Yud Ches, and we'll work our way back. which again is another problem which we're not going to deal today. Why the story? It seems to be two stories of creation, one in Perek Aleph and one in Perek Beis. And anyone's who ever read the Rav's article on this is a famous explanation. But Perek Beis pasuk Yud Ches, it says, "V'yomer Hashem Elokim, lo tov ha'adam lios levado." It's not good for man to be alone. Es lo ezer kenegdo. Right? I will make for him a helpmate, right, opposite him. Now, first of all, besides the fact that this seems to contradict a pasuk in Perek Aleph, in Perek Aleph, pasuk Chav Zayin, which I was going to start with, it says, "Vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tzamo, b'tzelem Elokim bara oto, zachar nekeva bara otam." In Perek Aleph, it says that God created man, male, and female. But it seems, in a more detailed explanation in Perek Beis, it seems that first God created only the male. Then God realized, well, not a good idea. It's not good for man to be alone. Let's give him a helpmate. No, why did he do that? Every other creation was created male and female. Even the Leviathan that we just read about, which was not good to create the male and female, even they were created male and female. So why didn't God do that? Or maybe he learned his lesson from Leviathan. I don't know. And maybe human beings would even be worse. But why didn't he do it? And then he said, "Oh, you know what? I gotta change my mind. Let's create a female." So once again, didn't you realize Lo Tov Adam Lios Levado? God, you're all knowing. You know the future. You know what's going to be. You don't make mistakes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't give out. Why is it then that all these psukim and all the cases we just mentioned, if you're trying to introduce yourself to the Jewish people or to the world, and you're telling you're a God and you're the creator of everything and you're all knowing and all powerful, you made mistake after mistake after mistake, giving the indication within the text that you're not what people should believe that you are. Why in the world would God do that? And again, we'll answer that question with another question, which what most Jews normally do. Perek Aleph, pasuk Yud Aleph, and Yud Bet. Again, another famous pasuk says as follows: V'yomer Elokim, Kad she'aretz desha, Esav mazriya zera. Right, the world should give off vegetation and grasses. Listen carefully to the next line. Eitz pri, a fruit tree, osa pri lamino, right, producing fruit after its own kind. Right, asher zaro ba'al oretz v'yichein. Right, God wanted a fruit tree producing fruit. That was pasuk Yud Aleph. Pasuk Yud Beis, the earth does what God wants. But Tod say arts desha, Esav mazriya zera lamineu. Yeah, all kinds of vegetation, grasses. Here, listen to the line. The eitz osa pri asher azo ba lamineu, and a tree producing fruit after its own kind. Vayar Elokim ki tov, and God saw that it was good. Rashi picks up. Chazal pick up on one point. What is the point? Eitz pri. This is Rashi and pasuk Yud Aleph. Sheyehei tam ha'etz katam ha'pri. God wanted the taste of the wood, of the tree itself, of the bark, to be the same as the fruit. God wanted the bark to be edible as well. V'hi lo astakain, but the earth didn't follow God's instructions. Vatotzi aretz the eitz osa pri. It made a tree, a wood tree, producing fruit. V'lo ha'etz pri, but the tree itself wasn't a fruit, wasn't edible. I didn't do what God wanted. Lefikach kishnes kalal adam alavono. Therefore, when man was punished for his sin, nifkada gam hi alavona v'niskala. She too was remembered, and God cursed the earth as well as cursing Adam. Now again, without getting involved with the similar issue that we had with the moon, is the earth a living entity that it can do something against the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? All right, and because of that, it's punished for what it did. How did the earth get away with it, with what it did in the beginning? But what's even more problematic, which Rashi doesn't really deal with, is the end of the pasuk Yud Beis. It says God saw what the earth did, and what does it say? V'yar Elokim ki tov. God said that was good. What do you mean it was good? The earth, didn't do what you wanted it to do. And subsequently you cursed it. So why was it good? So what's the point here? The point is the earth didn't, rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The earth did exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. What is it basically saying? God created within the earth, within land, with our existence here in this world, the ability to say no to God. That's what God wanted. And man that was created from earth inherited this ability. Because what is it trying to say here? The Torah isn't only trying to introduce you to who God is. That would be the point, and try to define God's capability. Right? There'd be a big gap between what God is capable of doing and how he's described in Parshat Bereshit. But the Torah knows that you're going to have a problem, because in your mind, if there is a creator of this vast universe that is so complex and so interrelated, a power beyond comprehension, then by nature, we would have to believe in a God that's eternal, a God that is omnipotent, a God that is infallible, a God, all the attributes that we can mention about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's true. But then we'd have one question. Then couldn't God have done a better job in creating the world? The world seems to be so much suffering and so much sorrow and so many things that we don't understand and such evil that takes place in the world. How is it possible for such an imperfect world to have been created by such a perfect being? And that is the question that I think the first Parsha is trying to address. Is God capable of creating a perfect world? Absolutely. He did, up in Shemayim. Up in Shemayim, right? God has even discussion. He's speaking to somebody. There are angels up in heaven. They are not physical beings. They are divine. They live forever. They see everything the way it's supposed to be, and everything is that they have an audience daily with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the perfect world. But for whatever reason, God did not create that world here. God made a separation between Shemayim and Aretz. Down in Aretz, it's a materialistic world as well as a spiritual world. And God gave human beings total freedom of choice to make the decision. I make decisions easy. It's just as easy to make the right decision, perhaps, or originally it was, as just as easy to make a right decision as it was to make a wrong decision. Right? And that's why a lot of things originally were a certain way. And maybe that's why originally the moon and the sun were equal. But over time, when we kept repeating the same mistakes, the scales tipped into a scenario where it wasn't always as simple to make the right decision. And so if our world is a world of Bechira Chavshis, we have to earn rewards that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for us. So let's look back at the cases that we gave, and try to look from the perspective of Bechira Chavshis. Number one, first case of Nasa Adam and Samenu. Rashi deals with that issue. And Rashi says basically it's true. We know darn well that there was a danger in writing this pasuk. You might get the wrong idea that God is not one, and that maybe the people that he's on his board are on an equal status, and they could also become CEO one of these days. Don't get that opinion. You know why God was telling you that? Because God wants to tell you a little bit about humility, that even HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a humble person. Because he knows that the Malachim, man is going to be made in certain ways, not only the image of God, but in certain ways are even greater than Malachim. While Malachim might be perfect, Malachim are called Omdim. They don't change, they don't grow. Human being has the ability of growing, of making his own decisions and becoming better. And in certain ways, since it's more difficult, we are on a higher madrega. So they might be jealous. And God, even though he can do whatever he wants, doesn't need anybody else's approval. He doesn't want to insult even the Malachim. And therefore, he asked their opinion. And that point was worthy enough to even have people make the mistake that maybe there's more people up. Why God, at the end of the Parsha, was upset when he created man. We're not going to deal with that issue now. That's totally different shear that would take too much time. I want to look at all the cases that we mentioned from the perspective of our answer of Bechira Chavshis and see how it makes sense. Midas Hadin, okay? Yeah, the world should run totally b'midas hadin. It should be that whenever, if a person did something wrong, he should immediately be punished. And if a person did something right, he should immediately be rewarded. That would be an ideal world, and I would like to see that that's the way the world runs. Why is it that certain tzaddikim seem to suffer? And why is it that certain Rishonim seem to prosper? That's a theological problem that's bothering us even till this day. But if that would be the case, then we'd be no different than the dogs of Pavlov. We would do things not because we wanted to do things. We would do things because we wanted the reward. And we would not sin because we're afraid of being punished. Once had a meeting in yeshiva of kids not coming, to minyan on time. They're sleeping. So I said, okay, great idea. All right, let's put electrodes in their beds, and at a certain time, 20 minutes before Shacharis, push a buzzer. Anybody who's still in bed will get a shock. That will get them out of bed. Now, that would solve the problem. They wouldn't be getting out of bed willingly to come to daven. So yes, midas hadin, we would like to see a world that runs the way we think it should run, where the good prosper and the wicked suffer, and it's clear that that's the case. That would totally remove the ability to make bechira chavshis decisions. Problem number one. Number two, question of the or. Right? God separated the or. Why did he do that? So what was so good about this or? So the Gemara in Chagiga, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, fills us in. Or Shabara Kadosh Baruch Hu B'Yom Rishon, the or that God created on day one was not simple daylight. Adam Sofa B'Misofa Olam Bad Sofa. You were Superman. You had X-ray vision. You could see from one end of the world up to the other end of the world. You had total clarity. Everything was open. Everything was visible. Now, by removing it, you create certain problems. What are the problems? Now you can do things in secret. If everything was visible, then you would never sin. A lot of times when we do something inappropriate, the first thing we try to do is to make sure that no one's looking. You ever on a highway, and in a car, how many of us follow the speed limit? Speed limit 60, we're going 75, 80, right? When and only when do we follow the speed limit? When Waze said a speed camera up ahead or a cop is up ahead, then all of a sudden you go from 75 down to 60. Because when somebody's watching, you don't do an avera. Certainly if a person can get into trouble. So yeah, if this light was still around, yeah, it's true. People wouldn't do right. Everything would be exposed. A lot of nefarious actions would no longer be done. But then we wouldn't have bechira chavshis. And now that you can hide your plans, you're much more open to do the wrong thing, and you have the option to do the wrong thing. The story that we brought with the two lights, the moon and the sun, right? First of all, what do they represent? According to Chazal, the sun represents the nations of the world, and particularly Esav. Esav and Yaakov, when the Torah describes them, they don't only describe him as the Bechor and the Tzair. They describe him as Esav being the Gadol and Yaakov being the Katan. Right? Most nations of the world, their calendars run based on the sun, on the solar calendar. The Jews are compared to the moon, and our calendar is a lunar calendar tied into the solar year, but it's basically a lunar calendar, because we are like the moon. We're not constant. We're not always. We're sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. We grow. We grow sometimes in both directions. We either increase or decrease depending on our, the level of our kedusha. And basically, the moon and the sun were equal. The ability to do good and the ability to do bad were equal. But somewhere down the line, as we mentioned, as humans started sinning, the tips were scaled a little bit. And the moon comes to complain to God and says, how can I, who want to be good, we're B'nai Yisrael, we want to do mitzvahs, we want to believe and we want to be monotheistic and be moral and ethical. How can we be successful in a world that is filled with so much evil? How is that possible? And God says, you're right. You're correct. That's just the way it is. Your job is, you're right, the world is a difficult place. And my expectations are for you to be able to be an island of light, even in the middle of darkness. Moon shines bright, even in darkness. And that is what the expectations are. And it's true. And a lot of people can't live up to that. And maybe you should even bring a korban chatas to me on Rosh Chodesh, because I made it so difficult to make the right decisions. And maybe I, by setting the scenario the way I did and not making a perfect world, indirectly I'm somewhat responsible, but basically the decision is yours. And the idea of the Taninim, that one is a really difficult one for me to explain. Rav Rivlin, the Mashgiach of Kerem B'Yavneh, has an interesting point why he mentions the Tanin more than any other animal. It could be he explains, because remember, we're talking the generation coming out of Egypt. In Egypt, there was the Tanin Agadol. Paro considered himself the ultimate god. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile, and there's a tradition in Egypt that the Nile was created by Tanin, who created all the other Taninim, but he was the one who created himself and created the world. He was the creator of the world. Where Rivlin suggests is that basically what God is, by pointing out only the Tanin over any other species, is to say to them, there is no other creator. There is no Tanin. Don't believe the Egyptians. I created everything, even the Tanim. Okay. But again, especially if it means the Leviathan, why mention it? Why, what's going on here? So, and the Leviathan is mentioned in many, many weird statements within Chazal, the Sukkah in the time of Mashiach, Anyway, it could be, in Kabbalah, the male represents the heavenly sphere, what we get from HaKadosh Baruch, what God gives us, of the talents that are given. If a person, is born in a certain family, right? If he's born to a wealthy family, the wealth is given to him. If he's, if he has intelligence was a gift from God. These are all the things that God gives, where we're born, who our parents are, what our intellectual capabilities. These are all gifts from God. That's the male. The Nekeva in Kabbalah represents the earth, not heaven, but earth. Those things that we do by ourselves, right? We have, Yirah Shamayim, we're the ones who determine what we do with the talents that God gave us. So basically what we're saying is that the female, which are the things that, the actions that we do, and the fact that the female salted, the salting represents suffering, the suffering that we endure in this world, and the good acts that we do in this world, we don't always get rewarded for them in this world. They are preserved, and we will receive that reward in Olam Haba. That could be what's going on here. To indicate, again, it doesn't answer really the question why you have to, but maybe that is part and parcel of, to realize that, what, yeah, you're right. Not a perfect world. We may not all understand exactly what's going on, but it's a promise that eventually everything is recorded. You will receive everything that you deserve. Finally, the story of Adam and Chava, right? Originally, in Perek Aleph, it says, Zachar Nekeva Barotam. Originally, man was created in a perfect state. Even the human being was created Zachar Nekeva. And Rashi says, however, but it was Zachar Nekeva in one being. They were united as one. That was the difference between him. And when God said, Lo tov adam lios levado, he just decided to separate them. It wasn't good enough it wasn't good for them to be together, but he separated them. And and now they were two independent beings, which is strange, because what does the pasuk say afterwards? Right? In Perek Bey's pasuk Chav Dalet, that va'azav ish et aviv v'dimo v'davak b'ishtav yulabasar echad. What's the goal of marriage? That a man should leave his mother and his father, and a woman should leave her mother and father, and they should join together and become one. But they were one to begin with. I mean, they were one. You made an operation on them, which is not unusual to this day, because they didn't like being one. And now they became independent genders. And now for the goal of ultimately realizing that it was a mistake and they have to get back together again. So why don't you just keep them together in the first place. And I think that what we're trying to say here is that originally pre-Chet, the human being was perfect state, right? And then we sinned, right? And we separated, and we were no longer in that perfect state. But the goal of humanity is to work towards reuniting, to come back into this perfect state. So that, in essence, what I think Parshas Bereshit, looking back at it, is trying to explain to us is, yes, God is all-knowable, God is all-powerful, and God is all-good. And God, again, did create a perfect world in heaven. It says clearly within the Torah. But our world, I don't know why. I mean, there are classic reasons as to explain maybe why. But God decided, and he states it openly, clearly, I created a physical world, right? And our Parsha, he tries to explain to us how difficult it is to maintain standards in this physical world. And I'll show you just the end of Bereshit. Again, a very, very strange story. Tell you exactly how difficult it is to maintain these standards. In Perek Vav, the beginning of Perek Vav, Pasuk Aleph and Beis, man began to increase on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. Again, we're not going to read all the difficulties with the psukim. Here's the point. Vayiru b'nei Elohim es benos ha'adam ki tavotena. The sons of Elohim saw the daughters of man, benot ha'adam. Obviously, the benot are different than the b'nei. Ki tavotena, that they were good. I don't know, good spiritually or good physically. They took for themselves wives from whatever they want. Maybe even married wives, maybe. They created, it seems to be, Pshat seems to be what they did was totally inappropriate. The question is, who are these B'nai Elohim, sons of God? Sounds like a different religion. So Rashi says, the word Elohim doesn't have to mean God. It's B'nai Hasarim Hashotim. These were the leaders of the different explanations. It either means the political leaders of the world at that time who thought that they can do whatever they wanted to do. Or it could be the tzaddikim at that time. Others say it was B'nai Sheikh, that they married girls who were below them. Whatever. And that created the problem. But there is a tradition, not the majority tradition, and Rashi quotes it of the Davar Acher, B'nai Elohim himasarim halachim b'shlichuso shamakam v'afim hayu misarvin behen. Targum Yosef and Ezekiel quotes it. These were fallen angels. The angels who complained to God, look at, had the same questions that we might have. You wanted to create the world. You asked us. We weren't thrilled about it. We knew that creating a physical world and human beings is problematic. And you see that it's problematic. And look at them, right? These are inferior beings. So God says, you think it'd be any better? Of course. So you go down to earth and make things better. And they went down to earth, and these angels, who were literally angels up in heaven, became animals, worse than human beings, down here in the earth below. That's how difficult. The temptations are very difficult. And why is that important to know? Because there's another goal. This is the first Parsha. We have a whole Torah in front of us with 613 mitzvos. Why in the world should I learn this Torah? And how much dedication should I give to this Torah? Why is that important? Because what the Torah is doing, by starting off with creation and the complex and beautiful world God made Gan Eden originally, it's climate control, nature worked in coordinates with the human beings. Everything grew on trees. You didn't have to plant it every year. It just had to pluck it off the tree. And in some cases, even the food came prepared already. What climate control? No, not too cold, not too hot. You didn't even have to buy clothing. Everything was great. But what happened? Look what happened. First, right, one mitzvah, other Mechaba couldn't keep it. Cain kills his brother. And then we get to a scenario where by my next week in Parshat Noach, the whole world deserves to be wiped out. It's extremely difficult. And if you continue as it would go on in Sefer Bereshit, the different civilizations, right, of good people, right? Good people who made major mistakes and failures as far as a moral and ethical society is concerned. Yes, I want to tell you, I created this world. I created not a perfect world. That's up in Shemayim. I created a world where you have Bechira Chavshis. And you should be able, if you really think about it, you should be able, like Avram Avinu, to come up with the proper decision. But you know what? Not everybody's Avram Avinu. The average person, as seen by the stories that you'll read about this week and the following weeks up, you see man's failure, right? Civilization's failure to live up to these expectations. And therefore, I'm giving you this book, right, to enhance your capability of being able to make the right choice. Because the goal is, even though you were expelled from Gan Eden, to one day be able to come back to it. And I want to leave you with a beautiful word by Rav Chaim Goldvich. Rav Chaim Goldvich, Zichron Livracha, the founder of the Hesder Yeshiva, the first Yeshiva Karabi Abba. He says there's a Mishnah talks about the fact that on the Shlosh Regalim, each regal has a unique aspect of sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash that represented something that we want to accomplish. On Sukkot, there's something called Nisa Chamayim. Normally, the libation on the Karbanos was with wine. On Sukkot, we add each day a water libation. And why do we do it, says the Mishnah? Because it's the beginning of the season, the rainy season is about to come. We want there to be rain. And we pray for rain, so we put water on the Mizbeach. Okay. On Pesach, on the first day of Chol Hamoed Pesach, we bring a Korban Omer from grain, from barley. And why do we do that? Says the Mishnah, because that's when we start planting the grains for the year, and we want there to be a successful planting and harvesting. Okay. And then as Shavuos, we bring Shtei Lechem, 2 loaves of wheat, finely sifted wheat bread in a mincha, in a meal offering. And why do we bring those? So the Peros Hakayitz, the summer fruits, should be successful. Says Rugovich, I understand the water on Sukkot for rain. I understand the barley on Pesach for grain. But the Shtei Lechem, right, wheat bread for Peros Hakayitz, bring nectarines or peaches. He says because there's 2 messages here. Yeah. Once upon a time, there's a whole debate. What was the Eitz Hadas? To those that say the Eitz Hadas was wheat, was a wheat tree. Once upon a time, wheat was a borei piyetz. It was a fruit. It grew by itself. You didn't have to you didn't have to work hard in order to get a loaf of bread. Just pull it off of a tree. After the sin of Adam and Chava, things changed. So when we bring Shtei Lechem, it is for the Peros Hakayitz, because not only do we want whatever Peros Hakayitz to grow that year to be fruitful, we're making another request. It's a double request. We want to go back to the stage of pre-Chet. We want to go back to the point in history where wheat was a borei pre-ha'etz. Right? That is our goal. And that goal is basically, it's exactly what we do when we get married. We started off perfect. We were separated. But 2 people meet together. Their goal is to come back to what they were in the beginning, to what their original state was. Yulu Basar Echad. That is the goal of humanity. And that's what the Torah, and that's what God is trying to tell me. Yes, what I want to accomplish in Parshat Bereshit, to show you, to describe, I am perfect. I created this whole world, and there's no other creator. I want you to know that I created it in a way that probably you find difficult to accept. It's not perfect in your eyes. Perfect in your eyes would be Midas Hadin, perfect. I created a world to ensure total Bechira Chavshis. And I'm hidden. I'm up in Shemayim. You can't always see. And a lot of questions are going to come up in life. And if you don't really work hard on it, chances of success are very slim. You see that from history. You see that from the stories we're about to read. But if you really learn Torah, and I gave you this book to be able to teach you all the things that you're supposed to know, and this will give you chizuk, and then you have the ability to go back not only to avoid the mistakes that everybody else is making. But if you really zoche to go back to the state of Adam and Chava pre-Chet, where nature, right, and spirituality and materialism work together as one and didn't necessarily compete with one another. That is the goal of Limud Torah. That's what makes this book and the right that we're beginning should be the central focus of our life, and our concentration as much as possible. And if we do that in Mitzvah Hashem, we should be zoche. That this should be a new beginning. We should be zoche to get back to what we were. Go back to Gan Eden. We got back to Eretz Yisrael, which is right as close to Gan Eden as you possibly can get. Mitzvah Hashem, we just should go all the way back home. Right, Shabbat Shalom.